So welcome to today's webinar, Emerging Trends in Food Waste Innovation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Angel Veza, and I'm the Director of Innovation Initiatives at ReFED. And we're so glad you could join us. Today's webinar is part of our Learning Lab series. It's designed for solution providers tackling food waste. And the goal is to give you practical tools, expert insights, and real-world examples to help you grow your impact. Now, before we dive into discussion with the panelists, we want to make sure you're aware of a couple of other exciting upcoming events at ReFED. So later this month, ReFED and World Wildlife Fund will be releasing the annual U.S. Food Waste Impact Report. It's going to share the latest on food waste trends in grocery, retail, and food service. So sign up for our mailing list, and you'll be one of the first to know when it's published. And on March 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to host a webinar with World Wildlife Fund to walk you through the new data and highlight some incredible wins from the PAC's 2025 pilots. You can register for that webinar in the link coming through in the chat. And of course, in case you missed it, we are bringing our ReFED Food Waste Solutions Summit to Charlotte, North Carolina from May 19th through the 21st. It is the premier food waste event of the year, bringing together hundreds of thought leaders and decision makers for 3 days of insights and inspiration. Tickets are on sale now at our early bird discounted rate for a limited time only. And I will say the 2025 ReFED Summit sold out, and we expect the same for 2026. So make sure to grab a ticket using that registration link that is also coming through the chat now. And without further ado, let's dive into today's topic. Again, we're covering emerging trends in food waste innovation. And today you're going to hear from a panel of experts as they share their insights on what solutions are gaining traction, roadblocks, and opportunities to accelerate impact. Moderating our discussion today is Katie Stebbins, the Executive Director of the Food and Nutrition Innovation Institute at Tufts University, where she is building a world-class innovation ecosystem at the crossroads of nutrition science, planetary resilience, and technology. Katie, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, Angel. This is really fun. And welcome, everyone. Today, I'm excited to talk about innovation, but Angel, I'm excited to talk about traction, right? Like, I think there's a lot of big ideas happening, but I also think it's a time to talk about traction and scalability. So this is going to be a lot of fun with our panel today. And we're gonna have 4 great speakers today. I'm gonna introduce each of you as I go to you and begin our conversation, if that works. And I'd love to go to you first. You already introduced yourself, but everyone knows that you're Angel Veza, Director of Innovation at ReFED, which, by the way, is just such a cool job title. I can't imagine how awesome that must be. So let's talk traction. As you just introduce yourself a little bit, I think I'd love for everyone to hear you talk about what's top of mind for you. As we're at the beginning of 2026, you're headed into your big conference, Director of Innovation. Like, what's alive and exciting? Where are you seeing some traction that you want to just put a pin in right now?
Yeah, so in terms of traction, or at least the things that I'm most excited about looking ahead for 2026, and I will say there's a lot of things to be excited about right now. So I'll just pick one, and I'm sure the other panelists will bring in a few others. But one of the things that we've been seeing more of is an evolution of upcycling models, and we're seeing a shift away from those single product pathways toward technologies and methodologies that can convert a range of byproducts into industrial inputs. And from a funding perspective, that's really compelling because it opens multiple end markets and then reduces demand concentration risk. And I think what's especially exciting from an impact perspective is when these materials can replace energy or emissions intensive inputs like plastic or cement, right? So when it's produced with low or carbon negative processes, these approaches offer that dual impact, avoiding methane emissions from landfill, but also reducing those life cycle emissions in the built environment. And I think that's a really exciting place that I'm looking forward to seeing more. But I think what's really top of mind for me is accelerating that adoption and impact. And so if we could really activate that broader system around better data and transparency, supportive policy signals, and economic incentives, then we have the conditions in place so that capital can flow more confidently, and then solutions can move from pilot to broader implementation.
Yeah. Yes. And can I just ask you to push on that a little bit. You know, ReFED got founded, what, in 2015, about 10, 11 years ago. And you guys had done a road mapping exercise at the time, which has been used and modeled since then. How you're talking about other industries, you're talking about cement and construction and energy and all these other things. How much have you, as director of innovation, do you have to push on that roadmap of the art of the possible of food waste innovation? Like, how, you know what I mean? Like, how much are we moving out of the circle outside of food into all these new areas where there's new opportunity? How are you doing that? And what are some areas that maybe we're not thinking about that you're like, oh wait, we're gonna go there?
I mean, we're pushing constantly, honestly, and always because at least in the work that I do, we need to not just look in our system, but because food waste crosses so many sectors. And so we are talking to other funders, other climate funders who are interested in this work and really showing them the intersection of all these different ways that food waste can be a solution across all different types of industries. So we're constantly having conversations with funders, businesses of all types. And I think that's really where we can have that impact in that education and demonstrating the potential there.
I love that. All right, I'm going to tie into that, and I'm going to go to Michael Wolf, who Michael, I always think of you not, I mean, I know about you at the Spoon because I've been honored to be on the Spoon, but I think about you at like the Consumer Electronics Show, and I think about you like always looking at the bleeding edge of what's going on everywhere. So let's introduce right now Michael Wolf, CEO, co-founder of the Spoon. Michael, when you think about this, like the art of the possible, the innovation space, you know, where do you see maybe the envelope where we need to push in this field of food waste that maybe we haven't pushed on yet, and do that in the framework of the Spoon and what the things you'd like to
Hmm.
accomplish through that venue?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking in the pre-chat about all our different points of view and what points we look at, and I do tend to have a very wide look at all the different links in the food value chain. But as you mentioned the Consumer Electronics Show, I'll just focus in on the consumer space for a while. I think that has been the most frustrating part of my hope for innovation around food waste reduction, because there hasn't been a lot of innovation there. But I'm starting to see some early signals of hope in that the large consumer electronics, and particularly appliance manufacturers, people who make refrigerators like LG and Samsung, and some of the other ones like Hisense, are really starting to take food waste reduction seriously. And I think they're being pushed in that direction in large part because what's happening in the larger macro environment, and that food costs are just continuing to go up. I think that consumers are taking it more seriously. And so I just think that I've seen both at the Consumer Electronics Show and also IFA, which is a larger European technology show in last September, some real interesting new technologies and pushes into new products around food waste reduction in refrigerators and other appliances.
Hmm. You know, it's interesting as you're talking about that, I'm picturing like House of the Future, and it's got my refrigerator is then like
Yeah.
spitting out stuff that's, you know, past expiration, and it's being ground up and it's shooting out into my backyard, and like it's a closed loop system that's
Yeah.
all solar powered built into my house, and that building code now like requires it, you know? I mean, you know, 20 years from now, like I hope those kind of things, and like the maybe those some of those appliance manufacturers are actually driving some of that, which is really interesting. So let's talk about what makes these gears go round. Paula, I want to go to you as someone with some investment perspective here. Paula Luu, you're the managing director, the new managing director,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's right.
at BioCycle, and you've got background in scouting and looking at investments in this space. When you're hearing Angel and Michael talk about this and thinking about how we get the gears moving, the investment capital flowing to do some of this, what's top of mind for you as you introduce us to yourself and BioCycle?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Katie. I love the phrase "the art of possible," and what I'm excited by and sort of am beginning to sort of see in the market is just differentiation of the different types of food waste that there are. So kind of like touching on points that Angel and Michael have noted. It's like not all food waste is created equal, right? We're having a chat about post-consumer food waste, post-commercial food waste, uh, different kinds of food waste in under both categories. And I think understanding creating the transparency, the data sets to understand volumes and what is possible with specific streams of food waste is really unlocking both innovation as well as investment. Like I get excited to hear, seed waste is being turned into inputs for cosmetics, or maybe looking at post-consumer, which is typically more heterogeneous, more complex. Seeing policy mechanisms, like not everything is solved by tech or is moved by tech. Like seeing extended producer responsibility or EPR supporting the scale up of different forms of infrastructure for small, medium, schmedium, and large composting facilities all over the country. It's fun and very invigorating to sort of see the different types of tools that are pushing infrastructure, innovation, investment, and all of that is sort of made possible through, I think, a deeper understanding or becoming more nuanced in the discussions, both on the investment and innovation side.
But in the capital stack of how we mature this space and normalize a different culture around it, like what are some signals or what are some things that you think are particularly interesting to investors that have some real traction? As we're gonna like traction sort of the theme here, right? Or
Totally. Yeah, I think there are different forms of capital that are better applied to the different pockets of innovation. So when I think about infrastructure, I think EPR is a funding mechanism. It will be providing grants. It will be providing compensation to set up new infrastructure and scale up infrastructure on that value to X sort of examples. Like I think venture. For like more advanced solutions or private equity for more advanced solutions, and then like catalytic and angel investing for like the beginning stages of that innovation, and then certainly like project finance to set up, or rather is like project finance is like a scaling mechanism, right? It's how you get from like one to two types of facilities to 5, 10, 50 of that type. And so you really need the entire stack.
there's really
Um,
there's a valley of death here, just like there would be
totally.
in any vertical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to come back and we're going to come back and talk about data, but I want to go over to Yvette Cabrera. Yvette is Director of Food Waste at NRDC. It's really great to have you with us, Yvette. And Yvette, as I'm hearing all this, I mean, I'm thinking about you and I are probably more on the economic development policy wonky side of all of this. Um, so when I hear Paula talking about how we move capital markets towards a direction, when I hear Michael talking about how industry starts to move places, Angel's giving a big view, I'm picturing like the local municipal public waste authority. Like, do we forget or how do we need to be centering all of those government voices that regulate all these spaces? And from your point, like introduce what you do and tell us about how we need to be thinking about that, the policy economic side of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I was getting all excited when Paula was talking because I was like, yes, we need policy to support this innovation. So yeah, thank you for the question. I'm Yvette Cabrera, Director of Food Waste at NRDC, where I lead our food waste policy work at the local, state, and federal levels. And just quickly, kind of to contextualize, for those of you that don't know NRDC, we are a national organization committed to protecting the planet, its people, and its natural resources. And we do so specifically through policy advocacy, litigation, and research. So real policy nerds over here. And in the food waste space, food waste policy is rising every single year. There are more and more bills being introduced every year, more jurisdictions coming into play, and more momentum building. And we're also in a really exciting moment because in most states, the legislative session for 2026 just began. So there's a ton of momentum building up this year. And we're going to see kind of our policy agenda play out across the United States over the next year plus. And I'll just say what is kind of top of mind for me coming to this conversation today is that policy, I think, may not look like innovation to many people. But we know through the work that we're doing that when policy is designed well, it can really be the engine that drives innovation. But it has to be done correctly. It only really works if we kind of ground it in strong data and if we set up guardrails within the policy to block against kind of bad solutions or things that could stifle innovation in the long run. So that's kind of how I'm coming to this conversation today from a really strong policy perspective.
Yeah, can I ask though that on that, because I'm a former municipal city planner and I've worked at the state level and the federal level, and people are familiar or comfortable with any of those different levels. Where do you see the traction? Does the traction have to happen at the federal level and trickle down? Are we going to see the grassroots movement happen in some really sophisticated local jurisdictions? Are we going to see some states decide that they're just going to really pass strong policies? I know in Massachusetts, where I am, the woman who was at the EPA here spoke in our event last year, and I think the data point she used was that we generate enough food waste in Massachusetts every 3 days to fill Fenway. Like it was like an astounding data point like that I just couldn't believe. But where are those different levels of government? Because I also worry about like a law of diminishing returns. I also worry about so many people trying to put on so many seatbelts for this and the noise being so loud. Like, where do we need to let some air breathe and the lead happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a key reason why NRDC chooses to work at the federal, state, and local level, because we're firm believers that if you're not pushing on all three at the same time, one of them is going to stifle the other. And that progress may ebb and flow. So, for example, like we're not seeing as much money flow out of the federal government right now to support food waste infrastructure at the state and local level. So we can shift our gaze when that happens to invest more time, more energy, more resources into the state and local level where food waste is being managed. So I don't know if there's one particular level that's going to kind of catapult the space forward. I think they all have to be working in tandem. NRDC for a long time has worked directly with municipalities across the US to help them design and implement different food waste programs locally. And not just that, to better understand their local data on food waste, like how much food waste they're generating and how much they're able to rescue. But frankly, the municipality by itself is only going to make so much progress unless they have kind of enabling state policies that are going to allow them to build more infrastructure, that are going to, offer grants and incentives to build the infrastructure or to offer, curbside organics recycling to their residents. So these things all kind of work in tandem, and we think it's critical to push on all three at the same time.
Well, it's safe to say, I mean, there's 177 people on this webinar right now. I can look down and see that number. So if all 177 people on this webinar are aware of the up and down nature of that, if they at least if you are working at the local level, familiarize yourself with the state and the federal. Like if you're at any level, make sure that you're fully aware of like the interlocking spider web of all of them, right? So that you can work together and push on that, which I would imagine, Angel, in your space, just in terms of, and I want to go lean into data now. So if we talk about data and data transparency and data silos and how we move this space forward, Angel, can you talk a little bit about just reflecting on what Yvette just said, like, how do you at ReFED think about this data transparency? We can only be as innovative, I think, as we have access to this information. How are you thinking about data in this space?
Yeah, no, obviously everyone knows we have our insights engine to help people understand where food waste is happening. I think the bigger thing though that needs a little bit more investment and coordination in terms of data is really the challenge with surplus food and food waste generally is that it's highly fragmented and geographically dispersed. So it's really hard to aggregate consistent volume and quality. And so that lack of reliability makes it harder for solutions to operate efficiently and then plan for that long-term impact. So I think from a funder perspective, right, that's going to create real supply risk and then eventually become revenue risk. So we want to figure out how we can fill those gaps in that upstream system with collection, aggregation, and pre-processing, and really understand what's happening geographically so that there's better coordination. And I think there's more investment and coordination around that enabling infrastructure. We can unlock innovation and greater impact faster.
Do you think that enough like I think about data transparency and navigating against, like, if I'm wanting to be an innovator in a space, I only know what I know. Like I only know what I have access to. Are we limiting the equitable access to innovation solutions in an entrepreneurship space by maybe not having a fully transparent, data set or multiple sets around this? I guess I'm trying to understand, like, do we have all the information we need to be innovative? Like, Michael, if you were having someone on your show who's like come up with this new idea, like, do they have to buy the data? Do they have to have an inside knowledge of data? Can they go on ReFED's website and get the data? Like, accessibility. Do we need to work on that? And Paula, I'd like you to also like weigh in on that, like how you might be seeing that problem play out, or maybe it's not a problem.
I think our information, we talk to solution providers every day, it helps them really understand and right size the problem for different sectors. So the information is out there and it's accessible, and we're here to help them navigate it and make sense of it and really understand the impact. I think, though, can we get more granular and more accurate? Absolutely. And that will require definitely more coordination among different stakeholders in this space to improve that data and have greater data transparency. And so it's a big opportunity for us as well.
Yeah. Paula, I know that data is something you think about a lot as well. How do you think about it? In the silos we have, the data silos, potential shared data. How do we move the needle on this data space?
I mean, the thing behind these businesses and systems is ultimately people. And so I think a big unlock here is really a need for focus on incentives, right? Like I think about there's a cost to data, there's a cost to collecting it, there's a cost to storing it, there's a cost to organizing it, there's a cost to analyzing it, there's a cost to sharing and disseminating it. And like for a small business as an example, like inputting the data, let alone like sharing, maybe elements of your business that you may or may not want to disclose to different entities. Like I just don't, I think the unlock here is like really setting up the incentives. And I wonder if there are other models from other industries that we could borrow from, or like even a policy mechanism that would support creating that incentive to collect the data and fund that collection. Like you sort of see that at the state level.
It's a great point of looking at other industries who completely unrelated, like banking. Like sometimes you look at what banking has done in terms of access and sharing and knowledge in ways that we couldn't even. It's like breathtaking.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Sometimes those reports cost like $23,000 too. So to your point of equity, I think it's like how do you make that accessible?
Yeah, I think it's been really important. And then Michael, I'm also, as Paula and Angel are talking, I'm thinking about sensors too. Like I'm thinking about the sensor space and how information flows off of measurement that might come from sensors that, Paula was saying, like a small business that doesn't have time to collect or track or input data. How much do you think will evolve from a sensor technology standpoint, integrative photonics, et cetera, that would push us towards like more information coming out of this system potentially? What places in the tech stack are you seeing where there might be some real opportunity? Oh, you're on mute, Michael.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I would say, having followed the Internet of Things for the past couple of decades and focused heavily on the smart home, it's an amazing time to watch how far the technology's come in terms of like what sensors can sense, from biological signals to kind of data signals. And I think the challenge is there's almost too much data, and trying to extract real value from that is, I think, going to be the real challenge. And so I think, Angel talked about like using the ReFED community as like, I think, a central gathering space to really make sure that we're all on the same page, because I think Data does cost a lot of money. There's so much data. I think getting proper alignment, as Paul referred to, around the incentive structures to make sure that businesses are inclined to kind of make the right decisions. But I think that it's a really interesting time if you're a food business to kind of like embrace these new technologies, but you just want to do it in a way that makes a lot of sense and not that your internal capacities, you're not overwhelmed with too much data from a decision making standpoint.
Yeah, and Yvette, I see your body language is excited. What's coming up for you? Tell us.
Yeah, it's just making me think about from my vantage point and the work that we're doing on policy. One of the things that we are really trying to figure out, and frankly could use a lot of help on constantly, is figuring out how to translate existing data or generate new data and research, and then translate that to policy decision makers. So for example, my team is working really hard to pass this food waste diversion policy in the state of Illinois, which essentially prohibits food waste from entering landfills and incinerators and requires all these food waste generators to either recycle their food scraps, donate it, prevent it. And one of the in order to kind of support this policy, one thing that NRDC did is commission this piece of research to look into the economic impacts of this food waste policy. So if we were to pass this policy, what would the economic impacts be at the state level? And the findings were incredible. We are actually in the process of releasing them now. So I'm going to say them here, but you will see them kind of on paper and in the public sphere very soon. But if we pass this comprehensive food waste diversion policy, it would generate 14,000 jobs, $3.8 billion in industry activity, and $172 million in tax revenue, which is incredibly impressive. It shows us, this isn't just an environmental policy, it's an economic development policy. Yeah. But where we're running into is how to kind of translate this data and put it in the hands of economic development leaders. People who not just are the people we work with day in and day out from, sustainability offices and policymakers, people who make economic development decisions for their state, for their cities. And frankly, they just don't have the toolkit yet to look at food waste as a space and use the data coming out of it to make economic development arguments. And that's something that we're trying really hard to kind of bridge that gap and help them make that argument more clearly.
I love that. I mean, as a former economic development leader, I think that makes so much sense. And I say that all the time, that we tend to take the world of food and put it in health and human services, or in food waste, we'll put it in Department of Public Works. The economic development leaders who traditionally would have been doing workforce development programming, industrial park planning, whatever we're doing, it's this kind of new tactical information around innovating for a better, more sustainable, economically resilient world that we need to be doing in hand with them. And I think you're right. If we don't show the real economic opportunity, new jobs, new values, new capital, like new waste streams that actually have I mean, I remember doing eco-industrial park planning when we used to take like, what is the value of a waste and put it as an input, into a new place and co-locate things like the Stonyfield farm model. That was a really cool thing to be able to do. That was kind of pre-AI, Michael, that we were like trying to make those marriages. I think it's a good moment because, Yvette, what you're talking about is so important. I love that there's a study coming out. There's some people doing some real work here. I'd love to hear from everybody too, like some shout outs, like what are some use cases or case studies happening right now that people should be looking to? Is there a municipality, a state, a company, someone who's inspiring you right now that you're like, that's something I'm watching, what they're doing is really cool. Or even like, any of it. Is there someone or something or some place you'd like to center as part of this conversation? Yvette's saying yes. I'm going to come back to you. Angel?
So hard to pick, Katie. There's so
We love
many.
all of our children. I get it. Like, I know, but so I always say, like, at the cocktail party when you're having a glass of wine, like, who is that one that you're just like, oh my God, you guys, I gotta tell you about this incredible freaking thing. I know you've got those in your head.
Can I share two? Is that okay?
Yes, you can share.
Okay. It's top of mind for me because we just talked about them in our little prep call, but what Black Earth Compost is doing is so exciting to me. I think the thing I'll highlight about them is Paula uses the term lovingly schmedium, but like a schmedium composter, but they're doing really incredible work providing access to organics recycling for all types of waste generators, honestly, and being really flexible and cost effective in terms of handling their decontamination. And so they've figured out really smart, simple models without extra equipment to decontaminate waste streams quickly and have that high quality end product. If you want to learn more, I'll share more separately. But like that type of work where you don't need brand new
chat to Black Earth Compost, but yeah,
but
Boston
you
area,
don't,
they're
yeah,
compost pickup person. Yeah.
they're amazing, but you don't need fancy technology to do that. And I think that's why I've loved how they've grown their model and have come up with creative ways to handle some of the challenges in organics recycling. But more on the other side of
All
things.
right.
Oh,
Yep.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Quick number two. Who's your second
Quick
one?
number two is one of our grantees. I have to give a shout out to Fieldwork Robotics, who we just did an open call around on-farm food loss and waste. And so they've developed technology around automated harvesting, but really it still is beneficial for the farmer as well. It's just it helping to make sure we're not losing product. And they're working very closely with Driscoll's to co-develop their robotics. And I think that type of partnership is really key in innovation and scale.
I love that. I love the robotics part of food tech. Absolutely. Those are two great examples. And then eventually Black Earth will have self-driving trucks. It'll be robotic too. And yeah. Michael, I'm going to go to you next since we just brought up robotics. Anyone in that world that's really lighting you up that you'd be like, you guys should check out these guys. They're doing something cool.
Not so much robotics. You were talking about sensors, and I've been following this company called Strela, who's based out of Washington State for some time, and they're really reinventing the ripening rooms, and helping us to really reduce waste in these rooms, because that was a space that was largely, I like to call, kind of gut driven by people who are the ripening room experts. But now we're starting to see sensor driven understanding and algorithmic understanding, like when is the peak time to move food out of ripening rooms onto the show floor, into the retail space, and reducing. They've gotten great traction. So we're talking about traction, but also they just reduced tons and tons of food waste. So I think they've doing some great work.
I wouldn't have even thought about that. I wouldn't have thought about sensor technology for ripening rooms. And that's fascinating. I love that. Paula, how about you?
I am suffering from recency bias because Angel and I were just at the U.S. Composting Council's conference a couple of weeks ago. But my shout out will probably, it's more of a concept than anything, but I think like such an inspiring one, and I'm digging into it more and more, is it's actually a working group coming out of Institute for Local Self-Reliance, or ILSR. And it's called the Heightful Network, and the concept of it is basically it's nothing new, but I think is innovative in this space. Like for community composters or the medium-sized composters, developing cooperatives to reduce the overall costs of operation in order to change the unit economics and build local, resilient, community-based infrastructure. So, think about like a network of facilities that are, a couple of miles apart from one another, and they're sharing rental equipment or even pieces of equipment across different facilities, or sharing a CFO. So like really creative working models for how to approach scaling infrastructure locally and cooperatively. It's very,
Paula, what you're almost describing, and at least when you're saying that, what I'm picturing is almost like instead of a company going total vertical on something, there's almost like I hate to say like the Uber effect, but like a platform of sharing to do
Mhm.
something more
Yes.
on demand, so that you can have a lot of, like, maybe a lot of more small players doing a lot more because we're sharing an infrastructure to get it done, instead of every company needing a super huge capital intensive vertical to do that. Is that along those lines?
Yes, exactly. And we've seen it work in farming and other industries. So like very excited to sort of see the growing buds of that in the composting industry.
I think it'd be amazing. I think it's also, Yvette, I'm going to go to you next because you inspired this line of questioning, but there's also the legal models in that. So when we're thinking about like now back to like economic development, you need like, what are the shared use agreements? What are models for that? What are model partnerships? What is the legal language in that? This is a whole new area of like, if we're going to share infrastructure, share labor, share operations and data, what do we start to do to maybe model some of that so that we can do some acceleration? I imagine Angel and Yvette, that's the kind of work you guys can lean into. Yvette, shout out from you. What is a place, use case, something that you're just like, yes, and
Yeah, I think that's completely on point with having to create these models. Shout out to the Zero Food Waste Coalition, actually. It's a coalition that NRDC co-founded alongside ReFED, Harvard, and World Wildlife Fund. I know many people on the call right now are members. But one of the things that we did together right away was create a state model policy toolkit for advocates, for policymakers, et cetera. So we did the legwork to look into what policies are working around the US, which ones are not, and which ones do we think are, are triple bottom line impacts heavy, right? And so one of the ones that I'll say I'm most excited about in there is something that NRDC and the Zero Food Waste Coalition are working on a lot is I mentioned them earlier, these food waste diversion policies, or others call them organic waste bans as well, if that's if other people know it by that term. But what I think is really exciting about these food waste diversion policies is that we're not like with this approach, we're not necessarily prescribing a single solution when we say you can no longer send your food scraps to a landfill or incinerator. We're essentially setting a target and then letting innovation flourish. And I think this is really exciting because we're not dictating exactly how to solve the problem. We're saying, find something better that works for you. And that really opens up the door to many different innovations. It's, food companies collaborating to upcycle surplus ingredients. It's hyper local composters collecting scraps by bike or large scale composting operations. It could be, apps that help businesses sell surplus food at a discount. It really kind of opens up the door to all these different innovations because frankly, we need them all. And we need a policy that kind of allows for that.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I
No,
got
go
excited. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
But no, you're describing a menu of options, which is fantastic because I like what you're saying that look, this is an infinitely complex problem and not one size is not going to fit all. And I love this, like, how do you almost choose your own adventure? How do you go in at the top of the funnel? And I can almost imagine, Angel, someone going to be like, here's me. I'm a homeowner, I'm an apartment renter, I'm a company owner, I own a multi-billion-dollar multinational company. Like, and how do I fit in? What is my role? What is my persona in this persona mapping exercise of how we do this and how can I be effective, both professionally and personally, which I think is super, super interesting. So what I want to do, I think we've got 5 more minutes until we're going to open it up to everyone for questions. Just for each of you to share closing thoughts, but in that closing thought, we want everyone to I like people to walk away from an innovation conversation, not feeling like it's out there somewhere, but like it's here. It's like in your lap, at your desk. Just closing thought, what's one thing, there's a million things, but what's one important thing people on this call could do to maybe be more activated in the space or feel more empowered, or the ways that you would like them to be doing that? So Angel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I know there's a variety of stakeholders, so I'll try and make this a pretty big, broad call to action. But I think if there was one thing, it would be to help reduce adoption risk. So if you generate food waste, consider committing to a pilot. If you're a solution provider, make it easy for your customers to say yes by quantifying that operational and financial value. If you're a funder, policymaker, other ecosystem player, right? look for ways to just de-risk that adoption and really incentivize participation. Everyone's kind of mentioned here, it takes all these different pieces to come together. So whatever you are in the ecosystem, help de-risk that adoption and make that opportunity available to everybody.
That would also mean raising your hand and saying, here's a risk or challenge I'm facing. And I think it's also about opening up permission for people to also raise their hand and say, I don't have all the answers. Like sometimes I think we want to be so clear and confident in where we're headed, especially in a tricky topic like this. So I think part of that is also people feeling empowered to go, I don't have the answer right now. I have the will. I don't necessarily have all the way, right? Okay, cool. Paula.
I'm going to build off of something you just said, having the will, but not always having the way. I think many of us are looking at the same question, challenge, issue, but sometimes because of the way that we're structured, working on a specific company, working in a specific time zone, we're not always sort of lifting our heads to come together and put heads together. I'll I'll borrow like something I've been doing for the last 5 years. I just host monthly office hours to talk about circular economy development with anybody that is willing to show up. And I wonder what kind of progress can be made, or like a call to action for this group would be like if you just put out into the LinkedIn world or whatever platform, like this is the challenge or the question that I'm grappling for the next 2 months. Like if anyone wants to talk to me about this because you're also working on the same thing, like let's chat for an hour on this day, and like bringing community to problem solve together. I think yeah, that a lot of incremental progress will happen that way, and that's how progress is made incrementally.
I love that. I think it's really simple, and it's so funny. You can sometimes get overwhelmed on LinkedIn or social media and looking at what everyone's doing, and you're like, I don't even know why I'm even trying because all these people are doing all this stuff. But there's this moment you just kind of have to take in and go, there's so much beautiful work happen. There's so much amazing stuff happen, and how hopeful and excited am I that all of that is happening, right? And so there's no wrong conversation. There's no conversation you shouldn't be having. All of them matter, right? Is what I'm saying. And I think doing what you're saying puts energy into that system. Michael, what can we do?
We talked about how data oftentimes is tough because it's siloed. I think that I would encourage companies that oftentimes see other organizations as competitors to try to work more closely together to kind of break down some of those data silos and maybe do some and maybe within the broader confines of ReFED, which is I think a great organizing structure to do more trials and pilots. And I do think long term AI is going to be a big unlock to potentially large leaps forward in terms of food waste reduction innovation. But I think we're kind of still in that messy middle ground of like trying to get the data right and kind of do more pilots to prove out the proof use cases. So just work more closely with what you see as your competitive peers and kind of unlock data and move forward in that way. So.
Michael, can we just quickly go back to that AI question real quickly? Because when I'm thinking about how ontologies and knowledge graphs are built and how the back end of AI is built, there's a whole world of the data that has to go in. Again, Paul, like getting back to the data, like the data that's got to go into building these agentic and generative systems, right?
Mhm.
There's got to be some responsibility on our part to figure out how we're advising the AI models that are building this out, right? Am I asking that question right? But I feel like there's almost
Yeah.
there's an
I think
expert
there were, yeah.
monitoring that has to be built here.
I think the responsibility is to make sure that there's good governance over these systems to make sure that ultimately when the decisions are made, there's still a human involved. Because I think this kind of I want to emphasize that human food systems continue to need to be remain human centered. So even as we continue to use things like agents to offload maybe some decision makings and put some automation into the food system, we still need humans at the end to govern these things and make sure that the data is right. And because there's an article I think sent to me by Ash, who's part of ReFED, about how when you start to put more automation into the food system, oftentimes if the AI is not designed right or the automation is not designed right, food can just sit there and the system can get locked and get kind of freeze and then
That's the
result in
industrial
more food waste. So right, we don't want that to happen. So
I completely agree with that. I mean, we are living in an industrialized food system, and we don't want to create more of that problem.
yeah.
And Yvette, I'll come over and end with you. This is really interesting on the regulatory side. This gets into governance and ethics in AI and the systems that we're building and the guardrails. And maybe you want to speak to that, but your last thoughts too on your call to action.
Yeah, I think my call to action would be to understand the policies that shape your work. Because we're all impacted by the policies at play here, whether, that's AI governance or, waste regulations. I think if you're an innovator, entrepreneur, funder, or advocate, policy can either accelerate your impact or really quietly block it. And so I think it's really important for people to learn kind of what governs your space at the local, state, federal, or even international level, because those rules often matter more than many people realize. And I will say there are ways to do that easily. So I know ReFED maintains a policy finder that I rely on constantly, but I also mentioned the Zero Food Waste Coalition, and I will drop a link to the chat in the chat to become a member. We have 300 members nationwide. It's a space just to learn about policy that's happening. And if you're interested, take policy action. And so open invitation for folks to join there and learn more about what policy is governing your space.
That's perfect. I love it. Oh my gosh, you guys, that was amazing. We get to open it up to some questions and hear more. We're excited to hear what folks have on the Zoom chat and how we can respond to that. So I'm going to allow the folks from ReFED to center some questions for us.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. So we've got a few questions from the chat, and I think with this one we'll start big and then kind of winnow down. So it's a pretty big ask, but is there a standard definition of waste? The author of this question said that they're doing a lot of work around surplus diversion from farms, but they're hearing that some folks are saying that technically this isn't waste. So how should they be thinking about this?
Who wants to take that one?
I can jump in quickly and others have thoughts, please jump in. But from ReFED's perspective, right, when we talk about food waste, it's that uneaten food and inedible parts. And so the other term we use, which it sounds like you're also using, is that surplus food, right? All that food that goes unsold or unused by a business or that goes uneaten at home. And so that's how we distinguish food waste from surplus food.
Okay. Any additions to that? That sounds good. Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. So the next question is someone who is working at the second harvest of Silicon Valley in the San Jose area. And they're saying that they're finding it really challenging as a food rescue organization to service all of their donors without having that sustainable funding. So the question is, how can policy also advocate for sustainable funding mechanisms to support nonprofits that are really relying on that to do their work? So open up that to Yvette.
Yeah. Can I hop in here?
Question on that. Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, that's a really wonderful question, Melissa. And first off, just thanks for the work you do. I know it's a lot. I think designing grants and funding mechanisms for the service providers into the policy themselves is critical. And my team has worked on SB 1383. I specifically don't know all the ins and outs of the grant mechanisms, but I have heard from stakeholders that it's just not enough to manage the flow of incoming food and food scraps for other compost or service providers. So I don't think there's a singular answer to how to do it. It really depends on where you are and what kind of different mechanisms your state or local jurisdiction have in place. But I am going to drop a link in the chat. If you are able to get onto that site, you'll see there are a series of different workshops provided on this page that walk through different funding mechanisms for decision makers to think about how to get their programs funded, how to get local organizations funded. And there is more to come on this. NRDC is doing more work on how to do this in a bigger and better way. But I completely understand that it's a big pain point for service providers in some of the states where these policies are in place.
I love it. Yvette, I feel like you and I should storm like the Urban Land Institute
Yes.
conferences, right? And just like bring all this stuff to what would be traditional land use planning conferences. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Paula, did you have a follow-up on that one? Because it seems like it also crosses over to your area a bit.
One thought that came to mind as Yvette was speaking was there isn't enough policy or supportive mechanisms for the programs or nonprofit organizations that are providing the services that, policies like SB 1383 are mandating. And so for me, from just a process standpoint, it feels like a business case or some kind of case needs to be made. And again, like not to sound like a broken record, but building that business case, how much food is diverted, from a particular business, like what is the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that, and like collating that across maybe different stakeholders to build that case for a municipal policy, for a state level policy. But it does feel like advocacy or strategic advocacy is like needed in order to maybe either amend or add different policy mechanisms to support the work that needs to be done to divert food waste.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, Michelle, we have another one. I see a bunch of things on AI popping up in the bubbles coming up too.
Yes, a lot more AI focused questions. The next one is, how are each of your organizations engaging with generative AI or not? I think the author of this question is kind of weighing the pros and cons of using that. So
Who would like to take that? Michael, you want to attack generative AI?
I mean, I would say that from what I've observed in talking to solution providers, those who are using more traditional old school AI like machine learning and neural networks are now starting to embrace or look at and start to use generative AI in trials, oftentimes around maybe kind of synthesizing data and insights. Because I think a lot of the hard technology that's been built over the past decade around food waste reduction, like some of these like lean path and computer vision systems, are kind of more traditional, older school AI. And I think now you can take some of this newer generative AI layered on top from an insights generation perspective. I think we're still pretty early on. I think a lot of people in their professional lives are using it on an individual basis. But I'm just starting to see some of these companies who have done some of these solutions try to weave it into their next generation of products.
Yeah, and I'll give a nod to the people I'm seeing in the chat who are doubling down on the extreme power usage of AI and what's going on with it right now. Of course, if we could fuel it all through food waste and maybe have a data center, maybe have an AI data center purely funded or fueled by food waste, that'd be interesting. But others of you guys who are using generative AI or agentic AI in different ways that you might want to talk about.
The only thing I'll just add is something we actually talked about when we were prepping this is not every solution needs AI. And it's really important to think about why you're using it and what you're actually trying to achieve with it. And there are lots of great resources out there, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, that can help you figure out the best way to use AI, if at all. I think one organization that does it well is the McGovern Foundation, I believe it is. And if we can send this in a follow-up, but they have a whole hub to help navigate AI. Not everyone has all the answers, and it's a great step-by-step way to think through it as you're building your solution.
Okay. All right, Michelle, another question?
I think we'll wrap it up with one more from the chat. So I think this one is really for Yvette. Where do you see that misalignment between policy and what on-the-ground programs can achieve, and what's needed to strengthen that connection?
I think there are a couple of points of misalignment, and if designed and navigated carefully, they can work better in tandem. I think one misalignment is exactly what we just talked about, is there in many policies, state level policies where we have these big mandates to keep food out of landfills. Oftentimes the folks who are doing providing those services to do that by donating food or recycling it don't have enough resources to actually meet the demand. And also, particularly in the food rescue community, a lot of that is volunteer driven and depends on philanthropic sources for funding. And I think that policy needs to help fix that to create a more sustainable model. I'll also say, and something that NRDC thinks about very deeply and how we design policies is creating enough kind of sufficient enough timeline to phase in, different generators complying with state laws and things like that to allow for both the education to catch up, but then also the infrastructure. Oftentimes, in these bills can really fail if the infrastructure and education aren't there, because they don't know how to comply. There's not kind of a cultural awareness around the importance of this issue. And oftentimes the infrastructure to actually process food scraps, to donate them isn't set up properly yet. And so by using these longer timelines where you have different thresholds phased in to comply with these state laws, it allows for that infrastructure and innovation to really catch up with the policy, which I think from one perspective, as someone who works in policy, it's really hard to work on something that's not going to actually go into implementation for 10 years. But at the same time, you want to do it right. You don't want to set up a bill that's going to fail when it kind of goes into implementation. So I would say those are a couple of really big misalignments that you have to navigate carefully when crafting these sort of policies.
Yeah, or build the capital into it. Yeah. Yeah. Paula, go ahead.
May I also add, because I fully agree with everything that was just said, but also enforcement. Sometimes there's just these amazing pieces of policies that go into effect, but then there's $0 allocated to enforce the actual policy. And so compliance around that policy is something that we're seeing play out in real time, particularly around food collection mandates or food waste diversion mandates.
Yeah, and enforcement and education. I mean, when I used to do a lot of environmental work in the cities, I could enforce all I wanted, but if someone didn't understand or know where to dump oil except down a drain, you don't want to fine them until you properly work with them and build the relationship to get a better solution on the table. So I think it's carrot and stick for sure. Yeah. I think we're about at time. So Angel, I want to give you the last word to wrap it up for everybody.
Yeah, well, just want to thank you, Katie, and all of our speakers today for all of your expert insights, and just everyone give them virtual round of applause and kudos in the chat, please, and please feel free to connect with them. But before we wrap up, we'd love feedback on today's webinar, understand how useful this content was for you. So if you'd like, and of course, if you'd like to share more feedback with us directly, please don't hesitate to email us. Of course, your input's going to help us make sure that we're giving you the insights and information you need. So the poll should be launched now. If you could just take a minute to fill that out. I appreciate you all for that. There it is.
I get to rate our session.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us again, and have a wonderful rest of your day. We will be in touch soon, and keep up all the hard work you're doing to reduce food waste. Thanks all.